Welcome to Virtual Voices. I'm Eli, one of your AI virtual hosts. Join us as we review previous videos from YouTuber Emmaus Road Productions.
And I am Miriam. And together, we bring you a deep dive podcast powered by Google's NotebookLM. This podcast is a generic AI-generated summary of Emmaus Road Productions videos, and we don't cover everything. Please consider watching his full video linked in the description below.
You know, I always kind of thought that whole "did Jesus actually die on the cross or not" thing was, pretty far out there. But then I started looking into this series by Emmaus Road Productions. They're going through Chip Ingram's book, Why I Believe. And they bring up some of these like alternative theories. And honestly, it made me stop and think. So we're going to take a deep dive into part 3 of this 7-part series today and really try to get to the bottom of this question. Did Jesus actually die?
Well, and it's interesting because I think for a lot of people it seems like a settled question. But you're right, it's been something that's been debated and discussed for centuries. And the reason that it's so important is that it goes straight to the heart of Christianity.
Yeah, and Emmaus Road Productions actually says that, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, that's it. That's the whole ballgame.
Yeah.
Christianity has no foundation.
Exactly. And it's kind of like that famous argument from C.S. Lewis. Jesus is either Lord, a lunatic, or a liar. And there is no middle ground.
Okay, so no pressure or anything. But this is kind of a big deal. Let's start unpacking some of these theories. And I think the first one that we should probably talk about is this thing called the swoon theory. That's what Emmaus Road Productions calls it anyway. What is that all about?
Yeah, so the swoon theory basically says that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. He just fainted. And then later on, he was revived in the tomb.
I mean, okay, I can see maybe where people would come at this from, right? Especially if you're trying to avoid the supernatural explanation.
Yeah, and I think Emmaus Road Productions acknowledges that. But then they go on to present what I think are some pretty strong counter-arguments. So, for example, they point to John 19.3134. And in this passage, it talks about how the Roman soldiers broke the legs of the 2 criminals that were crucified with Jesus.
Right. They did that to speed up the process, right? To actually ensure that they died.
Exactly. But they didn't break Jesus's legs because he was already dead. And instead, a soldier pierced his side with a spear, and blood and water flowed out.
Okay, so why is that detail so important?
Well, because you got to think about the Romans, right? They were experts at execution, especially crucifixion. They had this down to a science. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they weren't going to take any chances, especially with somebody like Jesus, who was, already causing them problems.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to be the soldier who let the supposedly dead guy walk away.
Exactly. And then there's the whole medical reality of crucifixion. I mean, it wasn't just the nails. It was the combination of the blood loss from the scourging, the intense stress that it put on the body, and then the spear piercing the heart, likely puncturing what's called the pericardial sac.
Pericardial sac, what is that?
Yeah, so it's the membrane that surrounds the heart, and that would have been fatal. So, I mean, even if, and this is a big if, even if Jesus somehow managed to survive the crucifixion, he would have been in no shape to move that giant stone in front of the tomb.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm starting to see why that swoon theory just doesn't really hold up.
Right. And Emmaus Road Productions goes on to share even more evidence against the swoon theory. But before we get into that, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the burial account itself.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
So one thing that Emmaus Road Productions points out about the burial account is that the Jewish leaders were actually worried that Jesus's disciples might steal the body and then claim that he'd risen from the dead.
Wait a minute, so even Jesus's opponents thought he was dead. That seems like a pretty big detail.
It is. It really underscores the fact that nobody, not even his enemies, doubted that Jesus had actually died on that cross. They were more worried about his followers and what they might do.
Okay, so what kind of security are we talking about here? Like,
right.
They just put a keep out sign on the tomb or something?
Oh, no, it was way more than that. They sealed the tomb with a massive stone, and then they posted a guard of Roman soldiers there. And we're not just talking about any guards. These were trained professionals. Their job was to keep order and prevent any disturbances.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're telling me to believe in the stolen body theory, you have to believe that this group of grieving disciples somehow overpowered these Roman guards, moved a giant stone, and stole the body.
Yeah.
All without anybody noticing.
Exactly. And remember, This is all happening in the middle of the night.
Right.
And Emmaus Road Productions is saying, look, even if the disciples were desperate enough to try something like that, it's really hard to imagine how they could have pulled it off.
I mean, wouldn't the guards have woken up? There had been signs of a struggle, right?
You'd think so, but the accounts say that the guards were completely caught off guard by the fact that the tomb was empty. It's almost as if something supernatural happened.
Okay, so then we go to Matthew 28.11-15, where the guards report the empty tomb to the chief priests. And what happens? The priests bribe them to lie.
Yeah. They tell them to spread this rumor that the disciples stole the body while they were sleeping.
Hold on. So they're basically just making up a story. If you're trying to discredit the resurrection, that seems like a pretty bad move.
It's kind of strange, isn't it? Why would they go through all that trouble to make up a story if the tomb wasn't actually empty?
Yeah.
It seems like it kind of backfires on them, because now they have this official Roman report of an empty tomb, even if they're claiming it was emptied by grave robbers.
That's a good point. It's like they're accidentally giving evidence to the other side.
It is. It's something that I think a lot of people miss. But Emmaus Road Productions highlights it to show how even the cover-up attempts end up supporting the idea of the resurrection in some ways.
So, the swoon theory seems pretty weak, and this whole stolen body idea is even more far-fetched. What other arguments does Emmaus Road Productions give?
Well, they also talk about the question of motive. Like, what would the disciples have to gain from making up this elaborate story about the resurrection? They even quote Pastor Chip Ingram directly. He says, if you're going to lie about something, you lie about something that makes your life better. You don't lie about something that's going to cost you everything. And Emmaus Road Productions really emphasizes this point. They talk about how the disciples were risking their lives, their reputations, everything.
Yeah, if they were just trying to protect themselves, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And remember the historical context here. These guys weren't powerful figures. Many of them were just simple fishermen. And suddenly, they're thrust into the middle of this movement that's challenging both the religious and the political establishment.
Yeah.
And they face persecution, imprisonment, even death.
So why would they lie about the resurrection? What would be the point?
Exactly. And then there's the case of Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the Apostle Paul. This guy was literally hunting down and persecuting Christians. And then he has this dramatic conversion. Emmaus Road Productions makes this comparison. They say it would be like the head of North Korea suddenly becoming a human rights activist.
Wow.
Yeah. And they use that example to show just how hard it is to explain Saul's transformation, unless you acknowledge that he really did have an experience with the risen Christ.
It's pretty hard to imagine somebody doing a 180 like that, unless something truly extraordinary happened to them.
Right. Something had to completely shake him to his core.
Yeah.
And if you read his own accounts, he's totally adamant that he encountered the risen Christ. He's willing to suffer, to be imprisoned, even to die for this belief. That doesn't sound like a liar or somebody just trying to gain power.
Okay, so we've got the historical context, the lack of any real motive, and these powerful personal stories. What else does Emmaus Road Productions bring up to support this idea of a real resurrection?
Well, one thing that they mention is that the first people to see that the tomb was empty were women.
That's right, and it's something that's easy to overlook, but Emmaus Road Productions emphasizes just how important that is in the historical context.
Okay, why is that such a big deal?
Well, back then, a woman's testimony wasn't seen as reliable as a man's. So if you were going to make up a story, you wouldn't choose women to be your main witnesses. It'd be like shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, that does seem kind of strange if you're trying to make people believe your story. Exactly, and that's why the fact that all four Gospels name women as the first to see the risen Christ suggests that this wasn't just some made-up story.
So it's like they're saying, look, we know this might sound weird, but this is what really happened.
That's a great way to put it. And Emmaus Road Productions really emphasizes that the evidence for Jesus' death and resurrection is strong, and it makes sense. It lines up with what Pastor Chip Ingram writes in his book. Although they do express some concern that the book may not be persuasive enough for those with a strong skeptical bias against Christianity.
So you're saying that even with all this evidence, some people still won't believe it?
Yeah, it's true. You know, people's worldviews can be really hard to change, even when they're faced with pretty strong evidence. But I still think it's important to have these conversations thoughtfully and respectfully. Even if someone doesn't end up agreeing with you, you can at least make them think. You can encourage them to question what they believe. And maybe, just maybe, open their minds to a new perspective.
Okay, so after all of this, what does it all mean for us today? Why does this debate about Jesus dying on the cross still matter in the 21st century?
Well, Emmaus Road Productions asks a really interesting question. They say, if you were on a jury and you had to decide whether or not Jesus rose from the dead, what evidence would you need to see to doubt the story that the Bible tells?
That's a good question. It really makes you think about your own biases. Am I being open-minded about this, or am I letting my own preconceived notions get in the way?
Right. And it also shows how important it is to understand the historical and cultural context surrounding these events. We can't just read these ancient texts with our modern perspective and expect to understand everything.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I appreciate about Emmaus Road Productions series. They do a great job of putting these events in their proper context. They help us see them through the eyes of the people who lived through them.
It's almost like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world in a completely different way.
And what's really cool is that they also give some practical advice on how to deal with common challenges from skeptics. Like, for example, if someone brings up the swoon theory, they suggest asking, why would the Romans take Jesus down from the cross if he wasn't dead? What would be the point?
That's a good point.
The Romans were all about efficiency and order. They wouldn't have wasted time and resources on someone they thought was still alive.
So it seems like the stolen body theory just doesn't really hold up when you start to really think about it.
Exactly. And they also talk about how powerful personal stories and experiences can be. It's one thing to talk about historical evidence, but it's another thing to hear about how someone like Saul of Tarsus, who went from persecuting Christians to being one of their most passionate advocates, to hear about how his life was completely transformed.
Yeah, those kinds of stories really do make you think. They show that this isn't just some theoretical debate. It's something that has real implications for how we understand our own lives, our purpose, our hope for the future.
Yeah, and that's really the message that Emmaus Road Productions is trying to get across. The question of whether Jesus really died isn't just an intellectual puzzle. It's a question that can change your life.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I think I'm going to check out the rest of Emmaus Road Productions series on why I believe.
I think anyone who's interested in these questions should definitely check it out. They do a fantastic job of presenting the evidence in a clear, engaging way.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore more fascinating ideas and questions. Until then, keep searching and keep those minds engaged.
Thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe or take a look at some of these other videos. And always remember Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Until next time, have a great day.